Welcome to Stories We Love. My name's Karen Laurie. I'm your hostess. And on this show, we get to interview people who I believe are doing something good for the world. And today, my guest is Lloyd Chapman, who founded and runs the American Small Business League. And so, welcome, Lloyd. Glad to see you. How are you?
Thanks for having me on your show.
My pleasure. So can you talk about like what inspired you to start this American Small Business League?
It was an accident. My father was a contracting officer for McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, California. And I went to work for a little computer company that was trying to get government subcontracts for computer products. And my father told me to do a Freedom of Information request for the small business subcontract plans on government contractors. And that's a plan where they explain to the Pentagon how they intend to hit the small business subcontracting goal. So the first one I did was a multi-billion-dollar contract. At that point in time, this is like 1989, the federal law required a small business subcontract goal of 20%. So I did the Freedom of Information request. They gave me the report, and they showed the small business goal was 16/100ths of 1%. I thought it was a typo.
16th
100th of 1%.
100ths of 1%.
Yeah, so the law mandated 20%, and
Yeah.
this was 16/100ths of 1%. And I called the guy up and I said, "Is this a typo?" And he goes, "No." So I was confused, and I called Barbara Boxer,
Yeah.
who turned me on to Les Aspin, who was chair of the House Armed Services Committee, and there was a congressional investigation into it. And the Pentagon and the Air Force were forced to increase money for small businesses from 16 million to 517 million. So I got a $500 million for small businesses with about 6 phone calls. So no, that's easy. So I did it again on some other Pentagon contracts. They wouldn't give it to me. They said it was top secret now. And I sued them. And I lost in the district court in San Francisco to a judge whose brother was a high-ranking Pentagon official. I appealed to the Ninth Circuit, and I won a unanimous decision in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And that was the legal standard in America for probably 32 years for what the government was required to release under the Freedom of Information Act. And of course, yeah, that was in newspapers all across the country. And the next thing that happened, I was leaving the office one night, and I saw someone left a computer on down the way. So I went down to turn it off. And I thought, I'm going to look something up. So I looked into the Small Business Administration's database of small businesses. And to my surprise, I found thousands of the biggest companies in the world. AT&T, everybody you can think of, Honda, Disney, Coke, Pepsi, Office Depot, every Fortune 500 firm. And I got on the phone, I started calling people. And finally, the Government Accountability Office returned my phone call, and I sent them the information, and I sent more information. And it was actually at LAX picking up my luggage, and a GAO guy called me up and said, "You hit a home run, kid." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "We're doing the investigation." So Government Accountability Office lost the investigation. It lasted 6 months, and they found 5,323 big businesses in the Small Business Administration database of small businesses. The Associated Press, Larry Marcusette wrote a story about it. It ran in newspapers all around the country. And there was a congressional investigation. I testified for Congress. It was like a 5.5-hour hearing. And that was like in 2002. And I thought it was over. Well, that was what, 22 years ago? It's just gotten worse.
So this you've been doing, were you working for the Small Business League? Had you
I was
created
working for a small business.
but
And after a few years, I started the organization. Quite frankly, the first round of it, I called them MISA, the Microcomputer Industry Suppliers Association. And then people from all these other industries started contacting me. And I realized this fraud and abuse in federal small business programs is across the board. So I changed the name to the American Small Business League. And that was, gosh, I don't know, 20-something years ago.
And so then you have been basically trying to get the government to do what they said they would do, which is to pay the 20% to small businesses. how does it even happen that the big businesses, you said over 5,000 big businesses are in the Small Business Association? How does that even happen?
Well, it happens when the government is trying to fabricate compliance with the law.
Oh,
So every year, I would say for 30 years, the United States government has fabricated compliance with the Small Business Act that mandates that today 23% go to small businesses. So what they do is the first thing they do is they exclude 2/3 of all federal acquisitions from their calculation. The next thing they do, they include billions in contracts to Fortune 500 firms in that calculation. And so the Small Business Administration's job is not to help small businesses, but it's to make it look like the government is achieving that goal. So it sounds kind of funny, but if you're a small business trying to get government contracts, the Small Business Administration is your biggest enemy.
wow.
Yeah.
So with all of that, that makes sense. So there's a lot of issues, it sounds like, for people with small businesses where it's hard for them to get the funding that they are wanting. And are there other things as well that are challenging for them?
Sure. I'll tell you something. Here's something that most people don't know. I was talking to a reporter one time, and he said, if you want to bore your editor, talk to him about stories about small businesses. Here's the truth of the matter. The largest economic stimulus program for the American people in history is the Small Business Act. Nobody knows that. That
Hmm.
was passed in 1953, the Small Business Act. And that law requires that if it says a fair portion of all federal contracts and subcontracts shall go to small businesses. And that makes sense. Here's some statistics that nobody knows. 99% of all US firms have less than 500 employees. So only 1% of the companies in America have over 500 employees.
Wow.
90% of all US firms have less than 100 employees. 87% have less than 20 employees, and the average American company has 10 employees.
Wow.
And those small businesses are responsible for half the gross domestic product, half the private sector workforce, over 90% of US exports, and most importantly, over 98% of all net new jobs. So in America today, in 2024, over 98% of all net new jobs come from companies with less than 500 employees, and mainly companies with less than 100 employees. Nobody knows that. So the Small Business Act and what the American Small Business League does, I think is crucial to every American, because that's about 350 billion that is supposed to be going into the middle class by law that is not happening. I would think maybe 30 to 40 billion is actually going in, and it's supposed to be 350.
That's
So
what that 20% is, or 23% is this,
23% that's supposed to go into it in 2023.
and that is worth the 350
Yeah.
bill.
If the government just simply complied with the Small Business Act of 1953, that would inject over $300 billion a year in perpetuity into the middle class. So to put that in perspective, remember when they had TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Economic Stimulus Program? That put $1 billion into small businesses one-time shot. Now compare that to 300, 350 every year in perpetuity. So that would create millions of jobs, millions of jobs. I tell you something, I was talking with some friends the other day about the homeless problem. And I was thinking, if the government would simply comply with existing federal law and make sure the small businesses got that 23%, that would create a huge economic boom in the country. They would create millions of jobs. And I think that would probably have a dramatic positive impact on the homeless situation, right?
Interesting.
I was walking down the street by my house the other day, and there was a lot of empty retail space for lease, right? And I'm kind of seeing, some economic decline, around, at least around California, right? And I'm sure it's around the country. I saw a documentary about Gary, Indiana. They call it Scary Gary. That's a ghost town. Detroit's a ghost town, right? So many cities around the country are just becoming ghost towns. And cities that were huge metropolitan areas, when I was a kid, are now ghost towns like Detroit. And I think one of the reasons for that is the fact that the government's not complying with this law and putting that money into the hands of the small businesses where most Americans work, where most of the tax revenue comes from. And, you know, think of it this way. Here's what I've discovered. So 35 years of suing the government. I've got legal opinions from some of the brightest legal experts in the country on federal contracting law. And 97% of all federal spending goes to less than 1% of the companies in America. And that top 1% hasn't created one job in over 40 years. And many of those companies, as everybody knows, don't pay taxes. So think of this. Think of the government giving over 90% of all federal spending to less than 1% of the companies, and those companies having to create a single net new job in over 40 years. And dozens of them pay no taxes. You can Google Fortune 500 firms don't pay taxes, and there's multiple stories, right? So I think that if the government continues on this path, I think it's going to cause a significant economic meltdown. I really do.
Hmm. And this has been consistent through all governments. Has there ever been, since you've been doing
The
this?
only pro small business president in my lifetime was Bill Clinton.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Clinton was a real pro small business. Hillary Clinton was real pro small business, by the way. If you go back and look at the first debate with her and Trump, the first question was, what do you do about the economy? The first thing she says is small business. First thing she said, right? So, yeah, I worked on Obama's campaign for 12 hours a day for about a year. And he issued a statement that I helped write that said, most Americans work for small business. We must protect this valuable resource. And it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. He didn't do it. It got worse during his administration.
And who was that?
Pardon me?
Who was the person whose administration did get it worse under?
Obama.
Oh, Obama. Okay.
Obama, yeah. In fact, when I endorsed Obama, he put my endorsement on the front page of his campaign website.
Nice. Nice.
But, yeah.
But it didn't help.
Nope. I'll tell you something. I knew a guy who was good friends with the Clintons. And Clinton called him into the Oval Office one day, and Clinton told this guy that he's under a lot of pressure to close the Small Business Administration. So every president's under pressure to close the Small Business Administration because, again, that agency is responsible for making sure that 23% go to small businesses. Well, the Fortune 500 firms that we all know pretty much have a tremendous amount of power in Washington. They want every penny the government spends. They want every penny. They don't want 23% going to small businesses. You know, that $350 billion, they want that, right? So since Reagan, they've been trying to get the SBA closed. And Reagan tried to close it. Bush tried to close it. Obama tried to close it.
Wow.
Trump tried to close it. And I've been on, I would say, most of the national TV news programs talking about this. I've been on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox Business, right? I used to go on all the shows and talk about it. But yeah, and it's pretty much well documented that a lot of presidents have been under pressure to close the Small Business Administration. But it's sad because when Reagan was elected, the SBA budget was over $1 billion, and that was what, 30 something years ago. Today, the SBA budget should be about, I would say, 5 to 10 billion. I think it's like 700 million. So you've got a federal agency that's there to administer the largest economic stimulus program in history for the American people, and it's got a budget that's so minuscule it's impossible to run the agency on that kind of money. It's impossible. Yeah, it's very sad.
Wow. And so what do you do as a small business league? I mean, it sounds like you go to court a lot, but what
Yep.
do you specifically for the small businesses?
The main thing I do is sue the government. So, I've had a number of my attorneys tell me that I hold the record for the most legal victories against the government under the Freedom of Information Act. I don't know if that's true, but I've had several lawyers tell me that. I won about 110 legal battles against the federal government over the last 35 years. And the things that have happened to me during that time frame would sound like a James Bond movie. When you sue the federal government and go on national television and expose this stuff, they don't like it. They don't like it. If you want to get into that later on, we will. But yeah, they don't like it. And just guess what happens when you make the Pentagon unhappy? What do you think they do? right? They don't say, "Ah, congratulations, Lloyd, for a battle well fought." No, they don't do that. So yeah, I sue the government. Under the Freedom of Information Act, I get information that exposes the fraud abuse. I go on national television and talk about it. In fact, here's something right here. This is a transcript from a lawsuit that I won. This was in 2015. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here's what Judge William Alsop said about me. So be more like a David and Goliath. You get to come in there and be the underdog again against the big company, against the big government. They're trying to suppress the evidence. In that same case, Judge Alsop said, the purpose of the Freedom of Information Act is so the public can see how our government works. Congress passed this law so small businesses could have access to these contracts, and here's the United States covering it up. So a federal judge has accused the government, which is the Justice Department, of trying to cover up the fraud in federal small business contracting, suppress the evidence. He said they were trying to, they presented documents to the court that were false and misleading. So this is Judge Alsop in San Francisco. I'm not sure if he's still on the bench, but so I've won about 110 legal battles against the government in that building, and I think, oh gosh, yeah, it's been crazy, the things that have happened. I could write a book about it. In fact, I might. But
Nice.
so I sue the government. I get this information. In fact, I'll show you something. This is typical of what I get when I sue the government. I just say, can I see? So you said that you hit the small business goal. Can I see who you gave contracts to? They go, no. And this is what you get when you win. So they redact all the pertinent
Oh
information.
my gosh.
I
Wow.
won this. I won them. This is a win.
Oh my God.
And by the way, I tell you something. I can't find it, but I've got documents. The whole page is black. It looks like a bunch of black pages stapled together.
Wow.
Right? Yeah.
That doesn't make sense because when you have a Freedom of Information Act, it should be that you get the information, maybe not, phone numbers and social security numbers or tax ID numbers.
Here's
But
another page.
yeah. That's
Every
just
page is like that.
That's
So
so
think
wrong.
think of it this way. If they were hitting the small business goal like they said, what's the big deal about showing us who they gave the contracts to? Here's my favorite page.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So if they're hitting the goal like they tell Congress, and when the president like Biden releases a press release that they've done this, given the small business all this money, why can't you show us? Why isn't it on the internet? We should be able to go on the internet and see who got the contracts, how much they got, right?
Right.
Why to sue them? I spent $900,000, by the way, to get these documents.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
this
it
cost
seems
this
it
cost this cost $900,000 in 7 years in court to
wow.
get these documents, right? And to tell you the truth, the victory in this case, here's another page. The victory in this case was in the judge's statements. When the judge in the hearings would accuse the Justice Department of helping the Pentagon cover this up, that was worth it, quite frankly. To get that on the record, But
Hmm.
yeah,
So,
go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say I saw something recently where there was a girl who had a preschool, and then what happened was somehow some big corporation, I don't know what corporation it was, started buying up the preschools, and she didn't want her preschool bought up, but it was too hard. And then they were bad mouthing her. And so the parents weren't bringing the kids to her preschool anymore, even though she didn't do anything wrong. But the big business was bad mouthing her. And so she couldn't work, and she didn't have recourse because they have millions and billions of dollars to fight them, but they don't have, she doesn't have that kind of money to do a court case. So like with someone like that, is that like when you're doing this, is there something what you do that can help with stuff like that?
What? Not really. First of all, that's a private business, right? Um, and it's not subjected to any federal law. If she had a contract with the government, I can maybe help her. But yeah, that's just a private company that's not doing any business with the government, right? But she should get some a woman-owned law firm to take her case as on a pro bono basis, quite frankly.
Yeah, yeah, that would be good,
It
especially
sounds
it's
it
all
sounds
about.
like a pretty solid case for defamation or slander.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's hurting her business, when you sue somebody for defamation slander, you've got to show damages.
Right.
So she could probably show damages. So if I were her, I would look for some woman-owned law firm to take her case on a pro bono basis.
Yeah, that's smart. That's
Yeah.
interesting. So when do people come and join your American Small Business League? Do they join it or is it just you? And
You
then
know
you're
what?
kind
Hey,
of,
I used to have thousands of members in the past, and uh, I tried to retire several years ago. And what happened is I had all these members, they were giving me money, and they all wanted to talk to me all the time. So I was trying to run an organization, lobby Congress. I used to go to Washington State for a week. I've been in every office in the House and the Senate multiple times. I've met most of the presidents in my lifetime. And I've had as many as 12 lawsuits against the government at one time. I just didn't have time to talk to all these people, right? So
mm,
about, I don't know, several years ago, I decided to not let people join anymore. And I didn't need their money, to do it right. And it was, quite frankly, it was a huge distraction. So the American Small Business today is really more of a lobby organization. And I've got, lawyers from coast to coast, right? And but mainly we sue the government. And, but I tell you, I used to be on the phone 12 hours a day with people telling me the same story, the same
mm,
story. I'd hear that 100 times a day. The government's cheating me. They're cheating me. Yeah, I got it, right? So yeah, I gave up. I didn't need to hear that anymore. I knew that they were cheating the people, right? So as about 10 years ago, I focused all my efforts on litigation and trying to get out in the media, quite frankly. Uh,
mm-hmm.
I'll tell you my latest project, and I think you'll like this. It's for women. About, I don't know, 6 months ago, I was thinking about this, and for, I think, 25 years, the federal goal or contracting with woman-owned small businesses is 5%. And about 6 months ago, it occurred to me, well, that means that men are getting 95%.
Mm,
So this is something women should be outraged by. Women are half the population.
right.
They own 43% of the business in America. The number of woman-owned businesses has gone up, I think, over 100. It's more than doubled in 20 years. So the number of woman-owned businesses has doubled in 20 years, and that goal is stayed at 5%. So in 2024, unless something happens, um, about over 90% of all federal contracts will go to companies owned by white males.
Mm,
And women will get less than 5%, and the men will get 90 to 95%. And I don't think women understand that. And my goal is to get the woman-owned small business subcontract goal raised to 25%, which is still, quite frankly, not fair. It should be 50%, right, or 40%. But I think if we can just get it to 25, that'll be a major accomplishment, right? But if that happened, that would put around 300 billion a year in existing federal infrastructure spending into the hands of woman-owned small businesses, the middle class all across the country. And my calculation would create about 2 million jobs a year.
mm,
So, um, when you look at Congress, it's not half women, right? When you look at the president's cabinet, the top positions are all men, right? And I think that would empower women. They would have the money, quite frankly, and put them on more equal footing, right? And I
mm.
think it would have a huge positive impact on our economy. And I think it would get more women elected to Congress and maybe a woman president someday. But yeah, my goal right now is to get the federal small business subcontract goal for women raised from 5% to 25%. I'm hoping Bobby Kennedy's going to help me with that.
Oh, that'd be nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think he's really aware of the corruption in the government, and
Yeah.
so I think he could definitely probably help with that. So then, when you do these cases and you win, you like how does that affect small businesses? Does a law
All
change
right.
or yeah?
Well, when I win a lawsuit and I expose the fact that they're fabricating compliance with the goal, contracts of small businesses from coast to coast goes up. I've had people tell me that, if I win a lawsuit and I go on CBS and talk about it, the next day, small businesses tell me they got a call from some of their customers that says, we're going to start doing more business with you. Call me every day. I've heard that story a million times, right? So when I win a lawsuit and expose the fact that small businesses are being cheated, the federal funds go up. Think about that first lawsuit I won. Before I got involved, they allocated 16 million to small businesses. After I got a congressional investigation, it went up to 517 million. So I got over $500 million for small businesses, and that took me maybe like 2 or 3 weeks, right? So yeah, every time a report comes out, here's something I'll show you. Here's a report that I worked with a Public Citizen on in 2015 called Slighted. You can see that?
Mm-hmm.
Public Citizen. And it says accounting tricks create false impression that small businesses are getting their share of federal procurement money and the political factors that might be at play. And that was Public Citizen. It's called Slighted. You can look it up. Slighted from 2015 for Public Citizen. About the same time, Mother Jones did an investigative story called Giant Corporations Reaping Billions in Federal Small Business Contracts. You can look that up too from Mother Jones. I think it's Giant Corporations Reaping Billions in Federal Small Business Contracts. And that found the same thing. So there's been, I don't know, dozens of federal investigations into that, right? In fact, I'm in my home office, and this wall over here is covered from floor to ceiling in stories about that from, newspapers all across the country. But so yeah, so when I do this, it results in more money going to the middle class. I'll tell you something, by the way, that nobody knows about that I'm proud of. So when Bush Jr. tried to close the Small Business Administration in all federal programs for small businesses, so he wanted to bring an end to all the federal programs that direct federal contracts to small businesses and small businesses owned by women, minorities, and veterans. I found out about it from some friends of mine in Washington. I started going on national television talking about it. I used the Freedom of Information to expose it, and I stopped them. You can see a graph of the SBA budget like this, and then I started going on television and went back up like that, right? But laid off half of the staff and cut the SBA budget in half. And but nobody knows that. That wasn't on national television, right? And then Obama tried to close it. When Reagan was president, he tried to close the Small Business Administration by combining it with the Department of Commerce. So the Department of Commerce is the agency that represents Fortune 500 firms and big businesses.
Oh, interesting.
Combining the SBA and the Commerce Department is like combining the NAACP and the Ku Klux Klan, right? They have complete opposite goals.
Right.
And that was Reagan's plan to close it. I've still got those TV stories on my website. And then Obama tried to do the same thing. Obama called it streamlining government. And the funny thing, he gave a big speech, I'm going to streamline government and save money. The only thing he was going to do was combine the SBA and the Commerce Department. It was a ruse to try to cover that up, right? And I went on nationally and international TV and talked about it, and I stopped them. But yeah, nobody knows that. And but again, it's documentable. It's documentable. You go out there and find it. But and then yeah, I would say when you look at Biden's done nothing for small business. He's done nothing for women or minorities, really. But here's something funny. So 99% of all U.S. firms have less than 5 employees, right? I challenge anybody to find a single piece of legislation ever that only addressed companies with 5 employees or less. A piece of federal legislation designed to benefit those companies, even companies, let's just say with 100, that's 98% of all U.S. firms.
Right.
You cannot find a single piece of legislation in your lifetime that's directed towards companies with 100 employees or less that are responsible for half the gross domestic product, half the private sector workforce, over 90% of exports, and most importantly, around 98 to 99% of net new jobs. You can't find it.
Wow. So that sounds like the government has made laws but not defined who the law would benefit. When you're saying small business, so they could say that someplace like AT&T or Amazon or something like that are small businesses. Like, is that what you're saying? Or am I
I'll say that when I first looked into the SBA's database of small businesses around 2001, it was 2001. It was before 9/11. There were thousands. Yeah, AT&T, Verizon, Coke, Pepsi, Office Depot, Honda, Disney. There were thousands of Fortune 5. I would say almost every Fortune 500 firm was in there.
Wow.
And yeah, so but the funny thing is it's happening today. So if I did a Freedom of Information request to the Small Business Administration saying, please give me the names of the firms that got small business contracts in 2023, I'd have to spend 5 years in court.
Hmm.
Why that? If they're telling the truth, if they actually comply with the goal,
Mm-hmm.
it should be online, quite frankly. You should just be able to go online on the SBA
Yeah,
database
of
and say,
course.
here's all the companies that got the contracts, here's how much they got.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. I really would like to have a government that had transparency like that, where you can actually go look things up on the government really easily and see
yeah.
what they're doing. Because it makes, like, how can you know what to vote for if you can't see what they're doing?
I'll tell you something. Again, I've been doing this for 35 years. I could talk about this for the next 5 years. It's so much has happened, right? But this is kind of complicated. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, when I won that big lawsuit, the Pentagon passed a program called the Comprehensive Subcontracting Plan Test Program.
Say it again. The what?
Comprehensive Subcontracting Plan Test Program.
Wow. Okay.
Most amazing thing about it is nobody knew about it for a decade. Nobody knew about it for a decade. People who teach federal contracting law had never heard of it. People in the House and Senate Small Business Committee had never, it was buried in the Defense Authorization Bill. And so back in the late 80s, early 90s, if you had a small business subcontracting goal of, let's just say, $500,000, and you only did 400, you had to give the government $100,000 back as a penalty. It was called liquidated damages. And the reports that showed that they were not hitting the goal were, available under the Freedom of Information Act after won that case. So what they did was they passed this new program. You can look it up, the Comprehensive Subcontracting Plan Test Program. It had two provisions: the elimination of any penalties for noncompliance and the elimination of transparency. What do you think that did for small businesses when they eliminated the public's ability to see if these contractors were complying with the law, and they eliminated any transparency and any penalties? What do you
Yeah.
think? Right?
Yeah. It's not nice.
All right. So here's the funny thing. You ready?
Yeah.
Again, it's called the Comprehensive Subcontracting Plan Test Program. So they launched it in 1989. And guess how long they've been testing it?
Oh, how long? Since then?
1989.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they're still testing whether eliminating transparency and eliminating any penalty for noncompliance is going to help small business. That's actually happening right now in 2024. They're still testing whether eliminating transparency and eliminating any penalties for noncompliance is going to increase subcontracting opportunities for small businesses. Isn't that insane?
It seems like it is.
Yeah. If you Google it, Google American Small Business League, Comprehensive Subcontracting Plan Test Program, or Lloyd Chapman, and you'll see the stories about it, right? I came that close to getting eliminated. I was so close to getting eliminated.
What is it? What do you mean? Talk about that.
Well, I was lobbying Congress and going on, national television and talking about it, right? And stories in newspapers around the country. And the Pentagon actually issued a report. I can't remember what year it was, probably about 10, 15 years ago. And the Pentagon report said that the Comprehensive Subcontracting Plan Test Program had reduced the Pentagon's supplier database of small businesses. So the Pentagon admitted that it had failed. It wasn't increasing opportunities for small businesses. They'd lost, small businesses, and they renewed it again. By the way, they renewed it in perpetuity. So it used to be renewed every year after year. And, every year I was having, success in exposing, it's basically a fraudulent program. And so they just made it permanent, but yeah, it's kind of funny. They made it permanent because of me and the American Small Business League, because every year it was up for renewal. I'm on television talking about it, right? So I'll just make it permanent, get rid of that guy.
Right. Yeah.
Oh,
So what did you mean they almost eliminated you? What were you were going to
well,
say?
they almost, say it again.
You said they almost eliminated you.
No, they to get me off their back of trying to get the program abolished, they made it permanent.
I see. Okay, so that. Oh, I thought
Renewal
you were
every
talking
year.
about a different
Yeah,
experience.
second renewal every year in the defense authorization bill, and I would, go on TV and sue them to get information that showed that it was, fraudulent. So they made it permanent. So it's not renewed every year. Okay, you said what they do to eliminate me?
That's what
Let's
you said.
let's
So
talk about
you're
that.
talking about that now. I understand because I know the other story, but I would. It's
So
kind of
here's something funny.
yeah.
I shouldn't say funny. I think you'll find it interesting. So I won this lawsuit
Uh-huh.
and exposed the fact that the Pentagon had been lying to Congress and the American people about hitting this small business goal, which again, don't forget, the largest economic stimulus program in the history of America. And I had planned to go to Washington and meet with members of Congress and journalists. And that filed what's called an amicus brief on a Supreme Court case that was very similar to this case. This is over Exemption 6 of the Freedom of Information Act. And Night Reader Newspapers was suing the Agriculture Department because they wanted to see which grocery store chains were getting the most food stamps, I think it was. So, and the case is going to the Supreme Court. So I filed what's called an amicus brief, which I think is Latin for Friends of the Court, supporting Night Reader Newspapers. And so when I went to the Supreme Court, I was going to talk to journalists about this case. And about a week before I was supposed to go, I told several friends of mine, I don't think I'm going to be going. I think something's going to happen to me. And about a week before I was supposed to go, I was driving to San Diego, and I was stopped in a little town, and a truck closed on me for 2 miles. He'd be going 50 miles an hour and knocked the engine transmission out of my car. The guy never hit the brakes. There was no skid marks behind the car, and I suffered a traumatic brain injury and
Mm.
injuries to my foot, my knee, my neck, and my back. And I was in the hospital in therapy for like 2 years. So I never made it to the Supreme Court. I never made it to DC to expose this fraud that I uncovered. And again,
Wow.
I told several friends of mine that that would happen. The guy that hit me appeared to be wearing body armor. I've got pictures, and he appears to be wearing body armor. My doctors told me his injuries would have been fatal. He was completely uninjured.
Wow.
They said that was impossible. And he had on special clothing. I sued him, and when I deposed him, we asked him about his clothing. And right now, Karen, you know as much about his clothes as he did.
Mm.
He had this special, what looked like a motorcycle airbag jacket on, and two other layers of clothes underneath that. He had one padding on under his pants. So we asked him about his clothes. He didn't know where he bought them, what brand they were, where they were now, what he did with them. And I asked him, do you have any pictures of yourself wearing that jacket before or after the accident? He says, no. So he, under oath in a deposition, said he knew nothing about anything he had on, and he had disposed of all the clothes he had on the day of the accident.
Mm.
That sounds suspicious to you?
Slightly.
Yeah, you know what? I was knocked unconscious, and when I got out of the car, I couldn't walk, and I had my arm around a fireman. When I looked up, the guy that hit me was videotaping with his phone and laughing. He was doing this and laughing, making a video of me. And he should have been dead.
Wow.
His car didn't have an airbag, and his face should have hit the steering wheel. So physics, right? The laws of physics. Here's my head and his head. When he hit me, both our heads did this, right?
Right. Hmm.
Mine whiplashed and gave damage to my cerebellum and the front part of my brain. He should have suffered very similar injuries, except his would have been worse because when he hit me, my head went into the headrest. When he
Mm.
hit me, his face would have gone forward, hit the windshield. I mean, the steering wheel, right? He was
Mhm.
completely uninjured, which is impossible. But anyway, that's another story.
That's a crazy story.
Well, you
So
know, uh,
what
that's quite
about
frankly, when you go back and look, um, I consider myself a civilian whistleblower. Go to your computer tonight and look up whistleblowers murdered, whistleblowers disappeared. There's lots of stories,
Well, I know. Don't go looking that up, Lloyd.
lots of them.
Yeah, it's not good for you to look it up.
Yeah. Ah,
Just if you're a whistleblower, you don't, yeah, I don't know. Um, so when you are talking about, so one of the things that was interesting to me, and I wonder if this is something that could be a lawsuit, which is, these big companies come in and they start buying up whatever the smaller companies are. So when the big companies do that, they just like come in and they take whatever the things are that they are. I've seen that in well, my neighborhood has no stores, but near my neighborhood, there are lots of stores, and you can see where it's gone to like a chain. It used to be a cute little small store, and now it's a chain store, right? Is that something that you could sue about? Because that doesn't seem like it's
I
very
don't think so, because the small businesses agree to sell their business to the big business, right?
well, I think they get pushed to do it.
Well, you know what, that's true. That might be part of the unfair trade practices. I think it's the Sherman Antitrust Act, something like that. But yeah, I'm not that familiar with that legislation. But if you're being coerced or threatened or forced in some way to sell your company, you can do something about that. But quite frankly, when you talk about civil litigation and you've got a mom and pop floor shop and some Fortune 500 firms trying to buy you out, you can't. There's nothing you can do. You can't afford it, right?
Yeah.
That's actually a basic go-to legal strategy for Fortune 500 firms when they're up against a small business. They just outspend them. You can't beat them. I was thinking about suing Twitter the other day, and I Googled it. Can you sue Twitter? And thing came up and said Twitter's got an army of lawyers that just to defend against any lawsuit, even if it's legitimate, right? But yeah, it's hard for a small business to beat a Fortune 500 firm, in litigation, right? Unless you get a big law firm to take the case on a contingency or get a class action lawsuit. Like in San Francisco, there's Leif Cabraza and Bernstein. They're a big, international class action law firm, and they'll take, class action cases that could involve small businesses or, groups of people, right? But they're a big law firm I think in the tobacco litigation, things like that. They do big, class action lawsuits. But maybe if a group of small businesses got together that were being attacked by the same big business, they might be able to get a class action lawsuit, right?
Mm, mm.
That's
So
a little bit out of my
yeah,
realm of
your
expertise.
thing specifically is, okay, I'm going to get the government to comply with what the government has said it would do. That's
Yeah,
basically it.
yeah. The main thing I do is I am the number one protector of the largest economic stimulus program for the American people in history, the Small Business Act. And I said I'm the number one protector. I challenge anybody to find anybody other than Lloyd Chapman on national television objecting to the federal government giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms or objecting to the government trying to close the Small Business Administration. I've never seen it, uh, but certainly there's no one out there that's been on national television more than I have, doing that. I've been doing it for like 35 years, right? But it's surprising to me that all these groups that claim to represent small businesses, they've done nothing. So if you look at any group out there that claims to represent small businesses,
Hmm.
try to find any lawsuits they want against the government. You can't. Try to find the president of any organization in America that says they represent small businesses on national television, objecting to the government trying to close the one and only agency in this country that's designed to help America's 33 million small businesses, the SBA. I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can do it.
Wow. Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I'm so appreciative of you for, trying to get the government to comply with what it says it would do and get the government to be more transparent and more honest, even though it seems like they are going against that in every way. But yeah, it's just really, it just seems like it's such a valuable resource, small businesses, to, for America, and I think for all over the world. The thing that has the charm mostly are the small businesses. I don't want to go into a big concrete mall where everything is brand names. I want little tiny boutique
Yeah,
places or
yeah.
small restaurants or things that
I,
are Yeah, and it's just such a big research. And what is the percentage you said of the GDP that the small businesses make? Say that again.
Companies with less than 100 employees are responsible for about 50% of the gross domestic product, 50% of the private sector workforce, over 90% of US exports, and over 98% of all net new jobs. So think about that. Yeah, when you watch television, they're talking about jobs, jobs, jobs. One of the top concerns of the American people in the election is jobs in the economy. People need to get 98% of all net new jobs come from companies with less than 100 employees. And by the way, you'll never hear that on national television. You will never, ever, ever hear that on national television. I
Mm,
challenge anyone to find me anybody on national television talking about the fact that, gee, small business create, 90% of all net new jobs and half the GDP and half the private sector workforce. You'll never see that. Never, ever, ever.
mm, mm. Wow. Wow. Well, anything else I should ask you that I haven't asked you yet? This is
Oh,
interesting.
well, how about this? What can people do?
Yeah, what can people
Watch
do?
this, you go, well, I'm a woman, I've got a small business, and I don't think that, 95% of my tax dollars should go to male-owned companies. So if you're a woman and you don't think that 95% of your tax dollars should be spent just with male-owned companies, call your congressman. Start talking to other women in business. Start talking to NAWBO. I haven't contacted them yet, but I will. The National Association of Women Business Owners. I intend to contact them and see if they'll, join me and try to do this. But yeah, women should be outraged. Women should be outraged. You're being cheated by the government. You're
Mm,
being you're being discriminated against. You're being cheated. To tell you the truth, I kind of think I could win a lawsuit against the government for discrimination. I
mm,
think that giving men 95 to 90% of all federal contracts would qualify as discrimination under the Civil Rights Act. So I think it's probably illegal. And it's certainly unethical and not fair. Women are half the population, 43% of business owners, they're getting 5% of the contracts at most.
right. And then the contract isn't even a fulfilled
Yeah,
thing. It's even the 5%, it's a lesser percent of the actual contract because the contract's not being honored.
significant. So this is election year. This is women's chance to contact anybody running for Congress or for president. Say, what will you do to end the discrimination against woman-owned business in America and increase that goal from 5% to at least 25%? But yeah, I would love for someone running for the Senate or for Congress or for president to question in a nationally televised, situation and say, if you're elected, what will you do to end the discrimination against woman-owned business in America and give them an equitable share of federal contracts and stop giving men 95% of all federal spending?
Mm, yes. Yes, I like that idea. Wow. Well, Lloyd, thank you so much. That's just amazing. I really appreciate you, going to court. It sounds like you've gone.
I've
You,
got one last thing to tell you.
yeah, tell me.
I love your book.
Ah, you're so sweet.
My girlfriend took this from me as soon as she saw it. And yeah,
Aw,
she,
thank you.
yeah, she keeps it on her nightstand. So yeah, we love it.
Oh,
If anybody read
great.
this book, they should get it. It's amazing. Chronic Pleasure by Karen Laurie. It's amazing. I love it.
You're so sweet. Thank you so much. That's so kind of you. And
Thank you.
tell your girlfriend thank you.
I
And
will.
yeah, I really appreciate you. This was really interesting and fascinating. And thank you so very much. And thank you everybody who tuned in. And if you're a small business owner, listen to Lloyd and contact your congressperson or your senators and just start talking to them about getting the equity that you are meant to be getting instead of it going to the big Fortune 500 companies. Thank you so very much. Have a beautiful rest of your day. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Lloyd.